So next we're going to have Dr. Kiley present. Dr. Kiley is a director of the Division of Lung Diseases at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at NIH. And let me see if I can get his slides up here. Oops. Let's see. Okay. We have the hopefully new slides. Okay. Okay. So we are so grateful to NHLBI, which has also been another major leader in advancing sleep research at NIH. And thank you so much to Dr. Kiley for your leadership there and for being with us today. So with that, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dane and others, the organizing group, for putting all this together and inviting the NHLBI to participate. This is an important session, and we only wish we could do it in person, but I think we're all getting pretty comfortable and familiar with how to do things on Zoom, and so we're off to a good start here as well. Let me start by also passing along best regards from Dr. Gibbons. I think he would have been here if possible, but unfortunately, like Dr. Koroshetz, he had a commitment that overlapped, so he wasn't even able to tune in, but so he got stuck with me instead. But I also want to recognize Michael Tweary, Mariska Brown, and Shilp Dixit. All three have been really instrumental in helping not only with the sleep program at NHLBI, but also putting together our thoughts today for this presentation. Again, wonderful to be here. We were asked to address some of the emerging opportunities in sleep disorders research. So what we're going to do is do kind of a quick overview of a few things that we thought would be of interest to this group, touch on a little science that is particularly relevant to NHLBI. And since you've invited different institutes, we kind of thought, well, we might stay in our lane here and not drift too far left or right, because other ICs are sort of giving you sort of the top line of what's in their portfolio. Janet and Walter just did a nice job with what they're seeing in NINDS. So next slide, please, Julie. What we want to do is to go ahead and hit it again, is to make sure that we recognize that the NHLBI has a little different role in terms of sleep research than all the other institutes, because it houses the National Center on Sleep Disorders Research at NIH. And this is as you know, a congressionally mandated entity that was placed in the institute back in early 90s. And as part of the mandate that set up this center, there were three basic underpinnings that really drive its functions. The first is to support research, and research across the board, basic, clinical, applied, and also to look across the board in terms of the areas of science that are being promoted. The second, it has its own Sleep Disorders Research Advisory Board, which helps guide the activities of the center. It involves many, many representations across the sleep spectrum, so I won't go into that too much. Also, it has a coordinating function, which is kind of highlighted a bit in this slide. And then the final element is to promote and educate and have for what's important in terms of translating the research results into both health as well as improvements in our understanding of sleep disorders. The coordinating function is a critical one, and it's actually a very, it's become kind of very consuming in the sense that so many organizations across the government now have recognized the importance of sleep and circadian biology, that it's almost becoming just a full-time job to just do this element of what NCSDR was established to do. There's not only the Trans-NIH Sleep Research Coordinating Committee, as you can see here, that has practically all the ICs and institutes and centers across NIH involved, and it's growing almost on a yearly or every few year basis. So more and more institutes are getting portfolios or in sleep. That I think there's also really movement, a concerted effort in some cases to really make that happen. And then also just a few years ago, there was an interagency fatigue management group that reaches across various government agencies. And so here you can see things like well, NASA that everybody knows about, occupational health, Department of Defense, and I won't go on, but there's plenty of efforts that are going across the board in terms of really the coordinating aspects of sleep. So I think, as it was mentioned earlier, it's so cross-cutting that it impacts almost every single organ system, all bodily systems, but also society as a whole, as most of you know. Next slide, please. So Janet has already given you a little bit of this, so I won't sort of dive into it much more. As you can see, this just shows the data that she presented on funding a little differently. This is sleep and circadian research across NIH, and it shows active grants. It shows all the funding mechanism. It also includes intramural and extramural research. And you can't read this, so don't even try unless you have a microscope handy. But this is just giving you a sense of the growth in sleep research across the different institutes over about the last 5 years or so. So you can see clearly overall the bar graphs, the histogram here shows the blue, the very lightish blue color in 2019 is pretty much on the top of every institute across the board. And you can see heart, lung, neurology, aging, mental health, they're all leading in terms of the various contributions to funding sleep research. And as Janet mentioned, hit it again, please, Julie. You can see that across the entire almost couple of decades here now, just a continuous growth in sleep research. We've highlighted essentially about the $435 million that were spent in 19, and it looks when you project out a little bit higher in 20, although this is a very unusual year, as we've already heard from the congressman and from others, that we're still, the jury's out on how well we'll do in 2020 in terms of our total investment in sleep research. But I think you should be satisfied, hopefully gratified, that starting really almost at the beginning of when the Sleep Center was created up to the present time, there's been a fairly good amount of research being supported across the board. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is pivot just a little bit here and just give you a few examples of the kind of research that over the past year or so we've found to be particularly exciting and very relevant to Heart, Lung, and Blood's missions, his core mission of respiratory, pulmonary, hematologic, and other aspects of cardiothoracic medicine and biology, and how we think this is also informing not only some of the basic science and mechanistic work, but also moving forward in understanding sleep and its role in terms of disease. So this particular graph or figure shows two elements. We've tried to pack a lot in here. The top row just kind of gives you a sense of some very basic science, some mouse work. And then below that, you'll see some human subjects research that I think aligns nicely. When you put these two stories together, you get a fairly interesting finding that sleep fragmentation here leads to increased atherosclerosis and hardening of the blood vessels. And here you can see in this graph that fragmented sleep and insufficient sleep are associated with an increase in the immune inflammatory response, and that's known to be also contributory to the atherosclerotic phenotype. And then the consequence of that, which is the stiffened arteries. the severity of the sleep fragmentation correlates with the higher risk of cardiovascular disease, as you can see in the lower panel. So again, some interesting, exciting, and new sort of combination of basic science, epidemiological work that really now moves us towards integrating sleep into cardiovascular risk. What we think is incredibly important and something that the Institute has been advocating for more research in for many, many years now, and it's starting to take shape and begin to produce some results. Next slide, please, Julie. The next one that I wanted to highlight, and again, don't get too discouraged that I'm only picking on a few. We had to go through a lot of research, and we really just wanted, in the interest of time, to skim across a couple of examples that were particularly exciting to us. But we didn't mean to leave anyone out here, or anyone's research out. What we wanted to do is just kind of give you a taste of what's in here. This is another important study that is incredibly timely because it looks at sex-specific differences in cardiovascular risk among a particularly important population, the U.S. Hispanics and Latinos. So focus on just that part of the population, and what you can see in this particular finding is there, and this is a novel finding in this study looking at the consequences of sleep-related risks among women and men. And what you can see here is men with insomnia have a greater risk of developing hypertension among the Latinos and Hispanics in the United States. And sleep apnea is also reported to be associated with hypertension in the same population of Latino and Hispanic men and women. But these findings support the importance of looking at sleep disorders as a potential modifiable target for disease prevention and reduction. So here you see, again, a combination of results bringing together multiple studies looking at sleep apnea as both an increased risk for hypertension in men and women, and then layering on top of that how insomnia independently is associated with an increased risk of incident hypertension in men, but we don't see it in women. So there again, opens up the door for additional research to try to tease out the differences, the gender-specific differences, and looking at the biology that underpins the sex differences that we see in cardiovascular risk and how that integrates with sleep. Next slide, please. The other important study that we thought would be useful in this context is to look at the genetic susceptibility as it relates to poor sleep habits. And here you can see these are independently shown to impact cardiovascular risk. And this study goes on to show that not only do you have a genetic risk, but also the behavioral factors can interact to contribute to the development of heart disease. So this is one where you can see a healthy sleep score, which is based on healthy sleep habits such as duration, quality, and consistent schedules that were associated with reduced risks of cardiovascular disease and stroke among participants with high genetic risk for cardiovascular disease across about an 8.5-year period in this large prospective studies. And this shows that individuals who had this low genetic risk and the poorest sleep patterns showed an increase in risk for poorer health outcomes, suggesting again that sleep behaviors can modify the risk or protection associated with the genetic predisposition for heart disease. So again, an interesting finding, and integrates our genetic basis of what we know with, again, known risk factors that are important for heart disease. So again, I focused a bit on heart disease here, mostly because in the last year or so, we've seen an uptick in the kind of research that's really starting to lend us more insights into the relationship between sleep and sleep disorders and rhythms and heart disease. Next slide, please. You heard a little bit already about coronavirus from neurology, from the NINDS, and I think this is incredibly an important area for the sleep community to also take notice of. We have just a little bit of anecdotal information right now, but that untreated sleep apnea may be associated with an increased risk of death for COVID-19 patients, that we know that sleep apnea treatment with CPAP is associated with a lower risk of death, and that there's certainly public health guidelines and treatment recommendations that are especially important for minorities at high risk for sleep apnea that could be integrated into these kinds of findings. And again, as Dr. Korchatz mentioned, there's a strong interest at NIH right now in looking at the downstream sequelae of those who are affected by COVID-19, and certainly sleep, insomnia, and other behavioral manifestations that may be apparent well beyond the initial infection are important to look at. And so we hope that the sleep community is also ready to take on that challenge as well. Next slide, please. So I want to also pivot a little bit here and talk about another important topic that's timely but also very integral into our sleep research portfolio, and this is to reduce sleep apnea and disparities using people-centered approaches. And hopefully our colleagues at PCORI will also give us more insights into all of this. But here you can see just a little bit of a look at Black Americans, who are about twice as likely as white Americans to have a risk of obstructive sleep apnea, leading to adverse health outcomes. And despite these disparities, interventions aimed at obstructive apnea related to morbidity and mortality among Blacks are specifically limited right now. NHLBI supports some research integrating the effectiveness of tailored sleep health messages that can reduce specific barriers to adequate OSA care and hopefully inspire confidence in seeking and using those recommendations for better ways to approach and treat sleep apnea in the African American community that are at risk. And so hopefully we can begin again to make inroads into what we need to know in these populations, how can we intervene, how can we work with stakeholders, and how we can develop effective communication channels to reach those who are highly susceptible and also those who may be highly at risk. Next, please. I don't want to leave you without an opportunity to just give a shout out to the National Sleep Research resource. This has been particularly important because it does provide a very valuable means for individuals across the board to access a database and to do in silico type research as well as do other types of research that might lend insights into data that's been collected through a variety of different types of mechanisms to harness all that and bring it all together in one place. Next slide, please. And one thing that I think is important is that this year, back up just one more, Julie, and I'll just want to highlight that this year there's a new data set in there that deals with narcolepsy. So up till now, there's been a lot in there related to apnea and sleep disordered breathing, but you're starting to see more things that are starting to appear now across the different disorders that are sleep related. So again, this is another important resource, and I do want to highlight it because it is supported by the NHLBI, but it's really there for all members of the community, the research community, and others to access this and really do some research using these data, and that's what it's there for. Now you can go to the next one, please, Julie. And so I want to wrap it up and just give you a sense of programmatic directions for 2021. We're in the final stages of developing up sort of our goals and research priorities. As you know, the Sleep Research Advisory Plan, research plan is being developed by the board, and we hope that will come together very soon. But these elements that you see on this slide, these pillars, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, they really are all aimed to improve our understanding of the cross-cutting and interdisciplinary nature of sleep and circadian rhythms, and they provide enormous opportunities for timely research that cut across again and significantly impact on health and well-being of individuals and populations. So they are very broad ranging, and they are all meant to promote sleep and circadian scientific advances with high translational value to strengthen not only healthcare, well-being, and safety. So in each of these categories, we put a little bit of an example of what we're doing to try to advance those areas so that we continue to make progress across the spectrum. So hit it again, Julie, please. In the scientific domain, you can just keep going and fill the four categories. one more, thank you, right there. So in the scientific domain, we recently funded new grants looking at circadian patterns of gene expression associated with disease. Right now we have ongoing work that's really looking at, within the Child Health Institute, neonatal maternal fetal network, looking at sleep apnea and maternal and cardiovascular and metabolic disease. In the area of disparities, I mentioned this already, but we have ongoing initiatives that are targeted at sleep and health disparities, looking at mechanisms and consequences of disparities related to sleep. And then in the public health and safety area, we're looking at programs that are developing pharmacotherapies to reverse opioid-induced breathing suppression. This is part of HEAL, and Dr. Korchatz mentioned this as well, that the sleep community has taken full advantage of targeted support and funding mechanisms that have been put out by NIH to really advance our understanding of the relationship between opioid addiction, the opioid pandemic, as well as the role of sleep in its overarching range of science that we need to learn about with respect to this addiction. Next slide, please. So I want to just wrap it up and just say, again, thank you to all of you for being part of all of this research. Thank you for everything you do to advocate for the Sleep Center and the sleep science, and we hope that we can continue to educate you on what we're doing in our programs and how that information is translating to improve the health of all Americans that are affected by sleep disorders. So again, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions at the end. I can't stay with you for the whole afternoon, but Michael and Mariska are here with you, so if you do get into questions later on, they are fully prepared to answer any of those if I have to sign off before we end. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Julie, and again, thanks to all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiley. That was an awesome presentation, and it's just really exciting to see all the great work. And